Hi guys, we're going to take a look at something different today. I wanted to focus on something I spotted on Twitter recently, which had me very interested. I reached out to Tai-Hao and here it is, new Alps-mount double-shot keycaps. Now, I don't often cover keycaps in great detail, but as Alps keycaps are a small pond to fish from, I thought this was well worth covering. I've talked about Tai-Hao on numerous occasions before. They are a Taiwanese company whose name, modestly, more or less translates to totally awesome, and they're a pretty well-known name in the vintage keyboard world. They made several series of Alps-style switches, and they still do so to this day in the shape of their APC switches, which are a copper mantis foot-style Alps clone. They also used to make slightly more different but still Alps-inspired switches, such as Tai-Hao Aruz switches, and even keyboards like the Fame keyboard series, but they no longer do either of those. Tai-Hao are also, and perhaps especially, known for their keycap sets, most notably their TI series, which they made for a lot of keyboards, such as this Autech MCK142, or the Autech Mac 105, or the Autech MCK84, or some keyboards from Tulip, or some keyboards from NTC, etc, etc. Suffice it to say, they're quite widespread. TI caps were fairly thin and made out of ABS, but they're double-shot, OEM profile, and they look really nice in my opinion, with a very pleasant font that's basically a knockoff of Helvetica, and the letter is in the correct place on the keycap, plus they give a pretty damn good sound. These ones have been super heavily used, they're very yellowed, and they're basically worn down to the nub, and they still look great in my opinion. For many years, they were the only ones selling Alps-mount keycaps. I'm not counting Matthias's ones as something someone would actually buy, and they sold them in several colorways. For example, this Tomcat one on my 8101 and this Dolce one on my FK 2002. They also did a pink and cyan one called Miami, and red versions of both the Tomcat and Dolce sets. There was always one problem with these Tai-Hao Alps sets though. They didn't actually fit any Alps keyboards, or at least no commercially produced ones that I'm aware of. It was a 104 key set, so no spares, and it was ANSI only as well as WinKey only, but ANSI Alps boards were fairly rare and desirable for this reason, and ones with Windows keys even more so. Even the box they sold it in shows a model of keyboard on which the set obviously wouldn't fit. The only vintage Alps keyboard that came close was this one, the Dell 8101, which came in many languages including US ANSI and was one of the few models modern enough to include Windows keys. However, none of the sets really fit the beige colorway that most of the originals had, and the black ones were fairly uncommon. Even this one with the Tomcat set on still didn't fit. The caps lock on the 8101 is stepped, as it's supposed to be of course, and the spacebar has the wrong shape and position for the stabilizer mounts. These four keys I also left original, as the Tomcat set replaces these with rather ugly looking grey keycaps, which unfortunately means that these four keycaps have different lettering from the rest, which is weird, but it's the best I could do, I guess. Most Alps boards were Win-keyless though, and many used a big-ass enter, such as this Chicone 5161. But that's only a drop in the ocean really. Alps-mount keyboards were incredibly varied, and there were so many different models with so many different, radically different layouts, that a keycap set that covers all of these would have to include several hundred caps just to cover all the different legends and positions. And that's not even counting the different stabilizer types that come into play and whatnot, so a set that fits all Alps keyboards is simply not feasible, but really you don't have to. You want to concentrate on the most common and the most desirable keyboards. What they've done now is come up with an Alps version of their Cubic set, and this includes 138 keys, much more than their original Alps sets, and they come in black and vintage white, i.e. a light beige, which are the correct choices for these old keyboards, I think. Colourful sets can be quite nice on the rare few black Alps keyboards in circulation, but the vast majority of Alps keyboards were beige, so things like that Miami set were difficult to use on something and look good, I think. These cubic sets are very similar to the old TI sets, except much more sharply angled. They're still double-shot ABS, they still have that nice font and correct letter positioning, and I think they look pretty great. The more rounded corners of the old TI sets did look a bit better in my opinion, but this definitely has a charm of its own, I think. Among the keys they added are 2 types of caps lock, 5 different types of shift, win key and non-win key type modifier keys. They even added the DOS type colors on the modifiers on the white sets, which is a very nice detail. 3 types of enter, 3 types of backspace, and a few more specialty and row-specific alternatives. And, of course, a 7-unit backspace correctly fitted with sockets for wire stabilizers, which is what was most commonly used on old Alps keyboards. The original 104 key sets they sold only had a 6.25 unit spacebar with cruciform stabilizers. Now the crux here is going to be the stabilizer mounts. This is what's going to complicate matters. For most keys it's not a problem. The set uses slots for so-called wire stabilizers, which is what this type is. This is the vastly predominant type of stabilizer on most Alps type boards, so this is not likely going to cause a conflict. The biggest problems are going to be the spacebar and the big-ass enter key, because both had multiple possible stab arrangements. Now, the 7-unit spacebar comes with slot for wire and co-star stabs, so that's actually very good. That shouldn't be an issue on most boards. Plus, most Alps keyboards used a 7-unit spacebar. The trickier one of the two is going to be the big-ass enter, because this key requires 2 stabilizers and this isn't as standard. Roughly speaking, most boards will have one of these 3 designs: a wire and a rod, a wire and a small co-star, and double co-star stabs. Now in this set they went for the wire and co-star type, which can be found on most Focus keyboards and, for example, the Monterey K104. Now I understand why they did it like this, because it means that you can always use at least one of the 2 stab sets on the other types of keycap, but it does mean that your enter key is going to be a bit wonky if it's not this wire and co-star type. So, like I said, it's definitely not going to fit every single Alps keyboard ever made, but it will definitely give you a bigger selection. Now, let's look at some classic Alps keyboards and see how they fare. The most desirable one is arguably this one, the Northgate OmniKey 101, one of the very few true ANSI Alps keyboards, and at over 2 kilos in weight, it's an absolute unit. In terms of quality and popularity, it was the only keyboard at the time which could play a rival to the venerable IBM Model M keyboard, and unlike that one, the OmniKey had N-key rollover, and it wasn't based on membranes or rivets. Personally, I think it's better than an M. And indeed, this should fit absolutely great. The original spacebar had 2 rod stabilizers as well, but it works fine without them. It's nice and stable. The ANSI enter is completely the same as well, of course, and the OmniKey 101 has no special keys, so this should be a one-on-one fit now. The other OmniKey models are not quite as good a fit. The set has no vertical F keys, which all the other models had. That's one thing I'd suggest they add, because that was pretty common on Alps keyboards, and the OmniKeys used a big-ass enter with a rod stabilizer in it. Now, this works, it's not terrible or anything, but it's not great either. You basically can only hit it on the ANSI portion of the enter key, so to speak. If you press it on the top here, it's going to be bad. The Gold Badge and the Ultra models additionally have weird keys, or they're in weird positions. Now, it is possible to, for example, stick other keys in these positions and then rebind them to the appropriate thing in AutoHotkey, but for example, for this weird cluster here, there's just not a great solution for that, frankly. The most common Alps chassis, without a doubt, has to be the Dell 8101 I showed earlier. Again, there were ANSI models for this, but also ISO and lots of other localized versions for it, plus Windows keys and even older Win keyless ones. So this, like I said, largely fit already, except for the caps lock and the space bar. And now the caps lock is fixed and you can additionally use it for the ISO models, but the smaller of the 2 spacebars that they included still has the original cruciform only stab mounts and therefore still doesn't fit this keyboard. So that's unfortunate, although the spacebar is probably the key you're least going to notice it on if you leave it original. However, it would be really nice if they could fix that, because the 8101 is a very popular chassis for Alps custom builds. The larger spacebar on the older Win keyless version also doesn't fit, because bizarrely that one has 2 pairs of slots for the wire stabilizers, and it's using the one that's not in line with the new spacebar. Now this is fixable. All you have to do is bend a stab wire into exactly the same shape, but make the hooks here a little bit longer. But it isn't out of the box compatible. The rest of the keys, both ANSI and ISO, should fit perfectly though. Note that the Alps produced Bigfoot keyboards such as the Bull and SGI versions, as well as the original Dell AT101 with the Salmon Alps and PBT keycaps, used a different spacebar model that is compatible with this. The older AT101 models feature much better switches, by the way. It's probably also useful to note that for ISO models they went for the international approach and stuck a backslash here and a double pointy, as I call it here, like on the French, German, Spanish, Italian, etc. layouts. And that's okay, that's probably an accommodating choice. The UK ISO version is a little bit different, but there's no way to make one set that fits all localized versions of ISO layout anyway. Another very common and popular Alps keyboard is the Focus FK2001, which was probably the most common clicky Alps keyboard. They made these in a variety of layouts as well, including ISO, although those are much rarer, and the last ones even had Windows keys, but the Win keyless ones are much more common. Most Focus keyboards used what I call Focus or Monterey layouts, with a big ass enter and with either a split right shift like this, or extra keys between the modifiers. I love these layouts, by the way. I think they're much better than ISO or especially ANSI. So the Focus boards are the first and second generations, the ones that end in UMP1001 and UMP1000 respectively, all use the same type of wire and co-star big ass enter that the set uses, and the split right shift is now also provided for in the set, so that's excellent. Most 2001s will therefore fit the new set perfectly. There are still a few problems though. The non-basic Focus boards all used an expanded key set with weird keys like diagonal arrows, turbo, vertical F keys, or rather PF keys, and calculator buttons, and obviously these are never going to be in a set like this, so those aren't going to be a great match. Some of the non-standard 2001s are also not going to fit. The WinKey ones use a 6-unit wire stabilizer spacebar, just like the AT101W, so that's again not going to work. The versions with Monterey layout, like this one, have these two keys here. Now, although there are 3 backslash keys in the set, there are none in row 0, and there's no blank key for this position here. But that's not that big of a problem, to be honest. You can just stick one of the extra row 0 keys in there. Everything else fits perfectly, at least. The really old Focus keyboards are a bit different. The FK555 uses the same wire and rod big ass enter that the Northgates used, which makes sense as the Omni keys are based directly on the 555, so that's not going to be ideal, but the rest fits perfectly, and the FK555 is arguably the best clicky Alps keyboard in my opinion. Plus it comes with crappy pad printed keycaps by default, so if you can live with a slightly wonky enter key, this is going to be a big improvement. Then another classic, the Monterey K104. This is a co-star keyboard, unfortunately, so although the spacebar still fits because it's got the correct cruciform stab holes for it, and the enter key fits as well actually because that's only half co-star, but the other stabilized keys are not going to fit because they use a different stab mount. Plus these two keys here are again going to read something different, of course, so this is not going to fit all that well. Something very similar goes for the Chicone KB5161. This is also a co-star keyboard, so again it's not going to fit that well. In fact, this is slightly worse because the enter key is also double co-star here, so that's not going to fit from the set either, whereas it does on the Monterey. It actually mostly fits the Apple extended keyboard as well. Again, the spacebar is short but uses wire stabs, so you'll have to use the original for that. And Apple's use different names for their keys, of course, but if you want to rock this on a Windows PC, this makes perfect sense. And you can swap the power key with, for example, the F13 that they included with the set. The stock set is PBT, but it's monochrome white, which I think doesn't look as good as two-tone standard sets. And they put the letters in the wrong corner, and the font is absolutely hideous. So I think this makes for an excellent upgrade. And finally, of course, my favorite keyboard, the one that started to grow the channel. Yes, it's the Acer KB101A again. Their newer 6312 series won't fit it, by the way. They used weird stabilizers. But the KB101A is 100% compatible, and it's a nice upgrade actually, as the originals used crappy silk screened keycaps or something like that. Plus, while I don't think the Acer's font is ugly or anything, I prefer the rip-off Helvetica that the Tai-Hao keycaps have. Now, of course, you're wondering about a sound test, so I'm going to do a quick one on the Acer with its stock caps, a double-shot cap from Alps Electric, one TI-type cap from Tai-Hao themselves, plus the new Cubic ones. Now, it's difficult to do these tests with 100% equality because the different positions on the board sound slightly different, but I tested beforehand and these positions are the most similar. So, here goes. Honestly, they all sound very similar, but the Tai-Hao ones maybe sound a little bit more high-pitched than the rest. The difference is not huge though, and again it might be due to the different positions on the keyboard. Still sounds great, I think. Anyway, I'm not going to do every single Alps keyboard I own, I just figured I'd look in detail at the more popular ones, and now if you want to know if the set is going to be compatible with your keyboard, you know what to look for and what to expect. I took a lot of effort to go through all this, but it's possible that I overlooked something or that you happen to have some mutant version that's a little bit different, so be sure to double check. Keyboards with very specialized keys like the Autotech Battlecruiser I showed are never going to work, of course. I mean, look at all this shit. But that's only to be expected. Plus, these are very useful for custom Alps keyboards, of course. I think that this is a great development, and at $48, it's frankly not even expensive. Good job, guys. If I could give them a few pointers for possible newer runs or add-on kits, I say first of all make a 6-unit spacebar with inserts for wire stabs, because that's kind of an oversight. This thing is almost completely useless really, and perhaps also big-ass enters that fit co-star and rod upper stabilizers. And if you want to be very inclusive, maybe add vertical F keys too. Those appeared on quite a few Alps keyboards. In terms of new colorways, Dolce's a nice classic of course, and maybe a Terra Drive styled one would look cool too. I think those would look very good on a black chassis. Plus, you can't go wrong with Space Cadet or Dancer. You know, take an old 8101, spray paint the case black, and stick one of those on would be well Gucci. That's it for this video, guys. I'm going to be busy for the next few hours reattaching stabilizers and cleaning up keyboards, so I'm going to see you later. If you guys like this style of video, maybe I'll do it again if there are other noteworthy keycap sets or other keyboard related things that come out. In any case, peace out.